The Memphis Grizzlies are the worst current playoff team in the entire NBA over the last 10 games. 2-8 in their last 10. They've lost 8 of their last 9. Lots of things not going Memphis's way at the moment. Is one of them maturity? Is it time to finally say that it's time to grow up to the Memphis Grizzlies? Some local writers are saying that in Memphis. Damichael and I will give our take next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay locked in with us.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We're so glad that you're joining us. I am Joe Mullinax, formerly of Grizzly Bear Blues over at SB Nation. Now I'm a writer for SB Nation NBA. I've got a piece going out today about going all in at the deadline. You can check me out at Fansided. You can also check me out as the co-host of this beautiful podcast that is made the more beautiful when Damichael Cole joins me, beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies over at the Commercial Appeal. You handsome devil. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great, Joe. You know, it's great to get back in the flow of things. You know, long weekend for myself. A lot of hours in my bed. But we're here. You know, we're here. I was able to get out to the game yesterday, and you know, the atmosphere was great, Joe. It was an electric atmosphere down the stretch, close game. Everyone standing up. Just one of those type of environments, but. You know, a lot of people didn't leave happy, so those happened. But it was great to be back in the FedEx Forum. But it's kind of, a little troubling to say though, Joe. 2 losses, the last two consecutive losses at home. Before that, the entire season, 3 losses, period, in FedEx Forum.
This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. Hopefully, you didn't think that the Grizzlies would score more than the Toronto Raptors. Otherwise, you would have lost your PrizePicks action on Sunday night. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. And you can check us out over on YouTube, rate, review, like, comment, subscribe, all those fun things. Continue to make us a part of your Memphis Grizzlies experience in good times and in bad. Damichael and I are always good for a laugh, a good take here or there. Damichael at least looks nice. I apologize for my appearance. I do the best I can. Damichael, one of your colleagues over at the Commercial Appeal, Mark Giannotto, who I know a little bit, haven't met Mark, but I've talked to him, had him on podcasts in the past. Obviously, you're familiar with him. He put out a column that I thought was really interesting about the current state of the Memphis Grizzlies and saying that the Grizzlies essentially need to grow up. The immaturity, whether it's Dillon Brooks hitting people in the testicular region, whether it's John Morant and the story that came out in The Athletic, that members of his entourage, associates, friends, whatever you want to call them, allegedly, the NBA found no actual evidence of this, but allegedly was involved. Well, that's not true. The altercation occurred between Morant's entourage and the Pacers. The allegation that was not found to be true was that a red laser was shined in the direction of the Pacers. And I don't mean to laugh to make light of it. I laugh because it sounds ridiculous to say out loud. But a red laser shined in and they said, oh my gosh, that's a gun. The Pacers did. So again, the NBA can't stress enough that has not been confirmed by the NBA. They did an investigation. Morant went on Twitter and tweeted about it. And that's one of the things that Giannotto says needs to be corrected in the behavior, not just of Morant, but the Grizzlies at large, the need to grow up. You're around this team just as much, if not more than anybody. You were recently on their 5-game West Coast swing. You, in my opinion, Damichael, are better equipped to try to answer this question. Do the Memphis Grizzlies need to grow up?
I think it's a mixed bag. Joe, it's a mixed bag for sure, because being around the team, you sense a maturity to handle the success that they've dealt with. But if I'm being completely honest with you, this team has never, at least in my tenure here, I've been covering the Grizzlies since December 2021. Mm-hmm. Since I've been here, Joe, they haven't struggled like this. And, they say that sometimes, when you're at your lowest, there are some things that are revealed, right? And I've wrote about it a couple times. There have been a couple players who have declined to talk, after these losses. There have been, players who, kind of sneak out of maybe not even sneak, but they're not in the locker room by the time the media gets there because, I guess they don't want that accountability. I mean, in their eyes, they're just disappointed, but there's accountability that comes with that, right? We talk about, everyone loves how the Grizzlies talk. Yeah, they talk, fine in the West. Not worried about this team, that team, run up the chimney and all that. Well, guess what? When you talk like that and then teams start, kicking your teeth in, you got to stand up and still respond. It's not when teams beat you 8 out of 9, that's when your responses matter a little bit more. Mm-hmm. When you're just poking your chest out, when you're winning 8 out of 9. When the Grizzlies won 11 games in a row, never had any of those type of problems that I just mentioned before. These things have only flared up in recent days, in recent weeks, since, the team has struggled a little bit more. So I think, there is some truth to that. There is some truth to some growing up. I was talking to Danny Green completely. I don't want to, twist it to make anyone think, Danny Green was talking in direct correlation to our question here.
Sure.
I asked him, I said, Danny, just when you were young, when you came up with the Cavs that year and then you moved to San Antonio, how big were those vets for you? He said, man, it was super important to my career. It was super important. And what I gathered from that, Joe, was the Grizzlies haven't really had vets like that. They haven't. I mean, you can call Dillon Brooks a vet, but Dillon Brooks literally is a 6-year guy. Not
since he who shall not be named on this podcast. You can say his name. It just makes my blood boil. I'm just joking. In fairness to Jay Crowder, he is very much that guy, right? Yeah, and I would say not since him has there been a player. Doesn't excuse his 29.3% three-point shooting, but I won't.
There it is. I knew you were coming with it.
I won't do that because I'm trying to give him credit where he deserves it. In this particular instance, I find it hard to believe that Jay Crowder would have
wouldn't stand for some of this.
Yeah. Right. He might not, again, there's pecking orders in NBA locker rooms. You know that better than me. Yeah. I don't know that he'd go at the top of the pecking order, but he would make it very clear that this is not okay. I'm not sure that's being outwardly said or and addressed by anybody, outside of the coaching staff. And as well as I do, Damichael, coaches, and I say this as on a smaller scale, a high school coach, a coach can yell and rant and rave and say all the things they want to say. At some point, players tune you out, right? And that doesn't mean that the coach is wrong. It just means that the player just thinks that the coach is getting on them because they're a coach. When it comes from a peer, when it comes from somebody that they are in the fight with, they're on the court with, the field of play, whatever it is, whatever sport, when it comes from somebody they respect, it carries a different weight. Yeah. And that does not exist on this Grizzlies roster right now. And, we'll talk about the trade deadline this week on the show. There's not really an option at the trade deadline that fixes that particular problem either.
It's a great point. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better myself. You coach sports, you played sports, same thing here. And I've always been a big advocate of that. You need accountability to really, create that character in the locker room. And like I said, for the most part of my tenure here, players like Ja Morant, I see Ja, raise his hand a lot of times, my bad, during the game, makes a bad pass, my bad, taps his teammates, that's my fault on the pass, all those little things. But again, we haven't seen adversity hit the Grizzlies like this.
Right.
Those were little passes during the game or lose 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4. We haven't seen 8 out of 9. We hadn't seen them go on a whole West Coast trip and come back with 0 wins. This is a different level of adversity. There is some frustration, in it because they're trying to figure it out. Taylor Jenkins trying to figure it out. The players are trying to figure it out. Remember the whole thing? Oh, they haven't practiced in 3 weeks. Well, guess what, Joe? They practiced. They practiced on Saturday, and they came back and lost again. So it's a lot of things. People are trying to figure out what's going on. But you're right, that accountability factor. You have Danny Green in the locker room right now. We'll see how much weight that carries and whatnot. But that's a big part of it.
At some point, you run out of excuses, right? And you just kind of got to look at the man in the mirror or the man in the glass. There's a poem that's about the man in the glass that Michael Jackson probably stole the man in the mirror idea from. Not really. I'm not going to read poetry on Locked On Grizzlies, I promise. But the idea behind it is, at the end of the day, you can fool everybody on the planet. You can convince everybody that you are capable of doing something that you're not capable of doing, or that you're a type of person that you're not. But at the end of your life, there's going to be one person there, and it's the man looking back in the glass. And I don't think we're quite at that point with the Grizzlies. It's on a much smaller scale when it comes to turnovers, poor fourth quarter play, all those sorts of things. I think it's time for coaches and players alike. They got to look at the man in the glass. That's where it's going to start here, first and foremost. We'll talk about how the game went against the Toronto Raptors that Damichael was in attendance for on Sunday night. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by PrizePicks. I'm going to be honest. I would have taken Jaren Jackson Jr. to score more than 20-some points against the Toronto Raptors. That would have been a move that I would have made, and I would have lost on PrizePicks. You don't always win in PrizePicks. That's important to understand. It's not always a win-lose circumstance, but it's a lot of fun. And I can't stress enough that it's extremely, extremely easy to do, and it's a blast. You can pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their PrizePick projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. The thing I like best about PrizePicks is it's not against other people. It's against the projections that are available, and there's so many different sports, NBA, NHL, all the way to cricket. So many different entries you can make in 60 seconds or less with fast and safe withdrawals. It's currently operational. PrizePicks is in over 30 states as well as in Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We talk Grizzlies-Raptors. What went right? What went wrong? Next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax. I am not a poet, nor do I recite poetry regularly. But if you listen to the first part of the show, you might have heard me mention The Man in the Glass. It's a great poem. Check it out. Hanging out with my good friend, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Grizzlies beat writer. He was in the house for Grizzlies-Raptors. You mentioned earlier in the show, it was a solid atmosphere. That came through on TV. Obviously, being a bit far away, removed from Memphis, I'm able to watch the games, but I'm not physically there. The energy was palpable just in terms of seeing it on television. So that came through. That was something I was going to talk about even before you brought it up. It was all for naught, at least in terms of wins and losses. The Grizzlies suffer another major fourth quarter meltdown. They decline. They were winning pretty handedly at one point, but the Raptors shut the Grizzlies down in a lot of ways in the fourth quarter and pull out the victory. The Grizzlies have now lost 8 of their last 9 games, as we've talked about so far on the show. Damichael, you and I try to be positive, right? We try to find the ray of sunshine in the darkening abyss that's surrounding us. And I thought that Taylor Jenkins, trying to find something that works in the midst of this chaos that is the current state of the Memphis Grizzlies, Santi Aldama getting the start in this game. And it wasn't like he started instead of Xavier Tillman. Xavier Tillman started too.
Yeah.
So Santi Aldama basically starts instead of, with Dillon Brooks out, instead of Zaire Williams, who we'll talk more about throughout the show, instead of Danny Green, who also maybe could have made some sense given his veteran presence that you mentioned a moment ago. He starts at small forward, Santi Aldama does. And it gave off some Markkanen Utah Jazz vibes because it was pretty successful. Santi had some success, especially in that first quarter. I was kind of surprised to see Aldama be able to hold his own in that way. That could be a solid wrinkle to this Grizzlies team if they're able to maintain it.
Joe, he has the skill set for it. And I've thought this for a while. I haven't really said it out loud, but I watch him really closely. I watch all the Grizzlies big men because a lot of people say the Grizzlies don't allow, their big men to kind of attack small mismatches a lot and things like that. So when we started seeing Jaren kind of punish guys a little bit, it was a little surprise, right? Mm-hmm. But with Santi, I think he's the best at that on this team right now. Yeah. If you put Santi against a 6'6", 6'7" guy, I think he has the most comfortable handle. He has nice touch, both hands.
Even better than Jaren, you're saying?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes. Now Jaren is more forceful.
Okay.
Now, if you want to talk about strength, Jaren can knock guys out of the way, and he's just stronger than a lot of guys. Santi is able to use his mobility, his agility. He can kind of slither around guys. It's different styles, but if you put a 6'5" guy on Santi, I feel like he's more capable of just getting to his spot. Jaren, there may be an offensive foul, while he's trying to get to his spot. As we saw in the first half of this past game, he picked up 3 fouls, and 2 of them were offensive fouls before he had to go to the bench. You don't see Santi committing a lot of offensive fouls because he's very nimble, he's very light on his feet, and he's very in control. So with that being said, that skill set kind of tailors to playing the 3, a little bit. And then when you factor in the way he shoots the basketball and on defense, he can kind of hold his own in space. It kind of worked out a little bit, right? The question pretty much now, Joe, is how much is this going to be a thing? Because Dillon will be back. I think with Danny, he's still very limited minutes restriction right now. There's a chance, I think, if Danny Green was all the way caught up, he probably would have been your starter in that situation. Zion Williams was your starter in that situation last season. I'm sure we'll talk more about him later. Only 11 minutes in a game that he would have started last season with the way he was going. But
he would have started 3 weeks ago.
He would have started 3 weeks ago. Your 2 first-round picks, David Roddy, Jake LaRavia, both guys, not in that situation as well. So I think it was saying a lot that he went with Santi. Said a lot that Santi kind of stepped up in the first half. Not gonna give him too much credit because he kind of, vanished a little bit in the second half. But then again, in the second half, Jaren Jackson Jr. came alive after only scoring 5 points in the first half as well. So I think those things kind of played off of each other. But Santi has some skill. I think the Grizzlies knocked that draft pick out of the park.
Oh, yeah. I'm not disputing that.
Yeah.
I think that my major concern with Santi is not even necessarily entirely his fault, because I do think maybe another topic for an episode this week. I think the Grizzlies only play 1 time this week, the rest of our recordings. So we'll have some opportunity to be a little bit more flexible with our topics. And the scheme of the Grizzlies defensively, very clearly, and again, it makes sense because it looks a lot like the Milwaukee Bucks, where Taylor Jenkins got a lot of his reps as an assistant. They give up a lot of threes, and it happens often. And Pete Pranica, the play-by-play guy for the Grizzlies, pointed this out on the broadcast. It was another game where a team outperformed their average in terms of three-point shooting. And it seems like Pete, Eric Hasseltine, whoever's doing the play-by-play, seems like they say that a lot. Yeah. So maybe that's something we could talk about on another episode. But my point is, of all of the issues that they have defending the 3, the guy that's worst at it on the team, at least in terms of percentages, when he's on the floor compared to when he's off, is Santi Aldama. So do you have any concerns with him defensively at the 3? Because I agree with you. I think he's a mismatch nightmare, depending on undersized, oversized, all those sorts of things. He has a pretty strong bag of tools, but I'm worried about him being able to close out on shooters. Maybe that's a recognition thing. We talk about that nimbleness, that quickness that we see offensively. Maybe it just will take a little more time to apply it defensively. Does that concern you at all? Or are you just more concerned about getting that scoring pop off the bench or in general? Because, again, somebody other than Desmond Bane has to score at some point when Morant's not playing.
Yeah, you'll remember earlier this season, particularly the 2 Utah Jazz games when they lost back-to-back in Utah, a couple in, I think, 2 games and 3 nights out there in Salt Lake City.
Right.
And the Jazz made 19 3-pointers in each of those games. And he started at power forward, Santi Aldama. This was before Jaren Jackson Jr. got back. And we talked about it here. And I talked about how he was struggling. He struggled. You go to the very first game of the season when the Knicks made that three-pointer to tie the game and then eventually went to overtime. Right. Cam Reddish cut right behind Santi. He was late to react. So I think part of it for him is just has to get the reps. Mm-hmm. But you're moving him over to the three. If he plays the three more, particularly just in general, playing beside Jaren Jackson Jr. We talked about it a little bit. I know it's something you want to see, but if you put him
in the traditional 4 or 5 sense, I wasn't even thinking of him as a 3.
Yeah, I feel like no matter where you put him, if you put him beside Jaren Jackson Jr., he will feel more comfortable closing out, knowing that, if I get beat off the dribble, Jaren's behind me. Right. I feel like that's a part of it as well with that conversation. But he's definitely still learning the mental side of the game on defense, and that's why his minutes kind of have been all over the place for the most part.
No, that makes total sense. I'm with you on that. We'll finish up this conversation about Grizzlies-Raptors next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, Damichael, I know you know this because I sent you a picture on Sunday. I'm very excited to talk about this next sponsor. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Built Bar. I had my first Built Bar on Sunday. It was a chocolate almond Built Bar. Let me tell you, it was delicious, Damichael. I thoroughly enjoyed it. An amazing treat without all the fat and calories. That's Built Bar, baby. We just got through the holidays. My goal is to eat a little healthier this year. I'm trying to lose some weight. I ran a 10K this past weekend, Damichael. I was very proud of myself. I don't want to add on calories that I just burned. Got to try Built with that in mind. Healthy is actually tasty with Built Bar. They're so delicious that you're going to think they're good for you. What makes them so good? They're covered in 100% real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and like I just mentioned, my personal favorite, coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but it's like it's a candy bar while maintaining your health. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 17 grams of protein. You can find them in Sam's Club now. You can find them in Walmart, not just at Built.com. Run to Walmart, Sam's Club today. Pick yourself up a Built Bar. Tell them that Joe Mullinax sent you. They may not know who I am, but they will most certainly know how excited I was because you'll be excited about Built.com and the Built Bar. We're going to talk Grizzlies-Raptors, put a bow on a bit of a bungle situation next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your co-host, Joe Mullinax, formerly of GBB, now of SB Nation NBA and Fansided and my Substack, Written in the Dark. I'm all over the place. Somebody that you can find in one place, aside from Locked On Grizzlies, is Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal. The Memphis Grizzlies beat writer does a fantastic job talking about them. So far on the show, we've talked about the Grizzlies needing to grow up a little bit, whether we agree with that sentiment. We've talked about Santi Aldama at the 3. Taylor Jenkins is getting a bit of a bad rap in terms of not trying enough things or, being a little too funky in situations with his rotations. That was a attempt that, maybe we found something, right? Maybe that's something that they can further explore. There are some other things that were noticeable in Grizzlies-Raptors that weren't the best, Damichael. The first thing I want to point out is another miserable fourth quarter closure. The Grizzlies had a pretty substantial lead, double digits in the third quarter against Toronto, and they just weren't able to finish the game. Again, Toronto finished it. The Memphis Grizzlies did not. And I couldn't help but notice, especially the last couple of shots, it seemed, instead of Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant didn't play. Instead of Bane and Jackson Jr., your two best guys on the court, leading the charge in terms of actions, we saw a couple Tyus Jones, Xavier Tillman pick and roll sets. And I think we've talked about it on here before, Damichael. One of my concerns about Taylor Jenkins offensively is how he gives them too much freedom at times. I feel like that would have been a good moment to say, all right, Desmond and Jaren, you two are going to handle this and you figure it out because you're our two best guys. No offense to Tyus Jones and Xavier Tillman. I don't want them in the mix deciding basketball games when Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane are on the floor.
I get it. I get it. I mean, it's a great point. Desmond Bane's averaging over 20 points a game.
And he was great against Toronto. Looked like the all-star Desmond Bane.
He was cooking. A 13-point second quarter, I think he had. And overall, he led the team in scoring. But Dez, I think he made 4 3-pointers. Didn't even attempt a 3-pointer in the second half. But he basically said, I'm taking what the defense gave me and that whole thing. And he was getting to the rim. And you'll notice, Joe, the one bunny he missed going to the rim where it rolled off the back iron late in that fourth quarter. It's just one of those shots where you figured, this might not be the Grizzlies' night. But getting to your point, it all goes back to those late game struggles. But Taylor Jenkins pointed something out after the game, Joe, and he wasn't happy.
Oh no, I saw that.
Say the least, he wasn't happy. And when he isn't happy, he usually is very short. But he pointed out a couple things, and he said 50 points. He pointed out how they gave up 50 points, Joe. And the two things that he said was points off turnovers, 20 Grizzlies turnovers.
Way too many.
29 points off turnovers. By the way, the Raptors only had 11 turnovers. And I think
that's 20 turnovers for the Grizzlies in a game where Tyus Jones started, and his claim to fame is assist-to-turnover ratio.
That's your guy, right? Yeah. But there were so many guys. I mean, Danny Green, Johnny Conchar, all those guys had
Johnny Conchar,
baby. All those guys had multiple turnovers. So it was a messy game. Toronto threw that zone out there at them. And there was that as well, kind of threw some wrinkles. But going back to the 50 points, 29 off turnovers, 21 second chance points. People don't get 21 second chance points against the Grizzlies. I don't have to tell you why that happened. It's a guy out right now who's the best rebounder, arguably in the NBA, but definitely the best offensive rebounder. And the Grizzlies were the top second chance point team, and now they're giving up 21 without Steven Adams in the lineup. So those two things combined, the turnovers and the second chance points, added up to 50 points, Joe. 50 points.
Isn't it amazing that, and I tweeted this recently, that Steven Adams went from washed in New Orleans, like everybody thought he couldn't play anymore, he was bad at basketball, to, you could easily argue now, aside from Morant, Bane, and Jaren, I don't think anybody would put Steven in front of those three. Yeah. But in terms of importance to the Grizzlies, I think Adams is fourth. And that's just crazy to me to say out loud. But again, the proof is in the pudding, right? Adams has missed, I think, 7 of these last 9 games now, and they look lost at times without him.
They don't lose all these games without Steven Adams.
I would agree. I would agree completely. We'll finish out our time together on this episode with a note about our boy, our guy, Zaire Williams, who has certainly been struggling. Nobody is saying that he hasn't been struggling offensively. You and I both have pointed out his mid-range success. And again, Taylor Jenkins, maybe just let him cook a little bit in that way. But it seems that they're, very focused on him being a certain kind of player, and Zaire's not able to do that right now. He's just not having success. So he's seen his role reduced. Only 11 minutes, as you pointed out earlier in the show, Damichael. 11 minutes against the Raptors. I think he came in late, like in mop-up duty in a recent game. Like he didn't even have a chance to be in the actual rotation. So Zaire Williams entering trade deadline week, in terms of a young prospect, if you're going to Detroit to talk about your boy Alec Burks or somebody like Sadiq Bey, who scored 20-plus points in a six-man-ish kind of role for the Pistons, Zaire Williams is right there. And if you're not sure he can be the guy that you need him to be, to a team like Detroit, they don't necessarily care that he may not be very good right now. They'll see the 6'8" potential like the Grizzlies saw a couple years ago. So I'm curious as to, again, you're there, you're talking to players. Zaire's current situation, is it something where they're acknowledging he just needs a beat? He just needs to kind of take a step back? Or do you think there might be something more there? Is it just the heat of, the trade deadline, getting to my mind a little bit?
I'm noticing it too, Joe. He's kind of being phased out of the rotation.
Ooh, in a way. You said phased out. Oh,
and it's notable because this was a guy who, if Dez or Dillon didn't play last season, it was a no-brainer.
Zaire's the starter.
It was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But now, we're to the point where Santi, basically a 7-foot guy is starting, above him. And it's not just Santi starting above him. It's the minute distribution overall, right? In this game, not only did the starting guys play more minutes, John Conchar, Danny Green, David Roddy, 3 guys who play a lot on the wing right there, all played more minutes in the Raptors game against them. And it's not just them. We go back to the Cleveland game, right? You mentioned the mock-up duty. Now, initially, I didn't take too much out of him coming up in that game late in mock-up duty because he was questionable to play for that game. He was a game-time decision. So I thought, they were just, going to try to rest him out. And I didn't think much of it until this most recent game. Now it's something to kind of go back and look at because Jake LaRavia played 7 minutes in that game. And Zaire got in towards the end, played, I think, like the final 4 minutes or so of action. So Jake LaRavia was playing more minutes than Zaire Williams.
And it makes you wonder if Dillon Brooks hadn't been suspended for this game.
He doesn't play.
Deservingly suspended, by the way. We didn't talk about that a ton.
Yeah.
Very much deserved. You don't just hit somebody in the man region and get away with it. Not on Locked On Grizzlies, at least. So it deserved suspension. But again, if Dillon's not suspended, Zaire only played 11 minutes. That means he probably doesn't play at all.
He doesn't. It's a 10-man rotation, and he's the odd man out at that point. So we'll see, where it goes from here, right? Game Tuesday, and you mentioned, they'll have some time off. They play Friday, and it's something to make note of. The Grizzlies will be practicing on today too. I want to make note of that. So we'll have some recaps and some things from practice as well, some updates there. And one of the things I want to know, and I'm probably going to ask Taylor, is about, Zaire Williams. And we'll talk about that as well in the next episode, Joe.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Damichael did a great job hyping up our next episode there. Very excited to get that feedback from practice. Very excited to hear that they're practicing the day after a game. I'm guessing Taylor Jenkins, again, much smaller scale as a fellow coach. I'm guessing he thinks the team needs it.
There's some urgency going on right now. You can feel it.
Yeah.
You can feel it.
Given the way, because I saw some of that press conference you were mentioning, or at least I saw some clips or some quotes from it. You could tell he was not pleased, to say the least. So I do think that that'll be an interesting practice to get some blurbs from. And then again, like we mentioned, going into a game against Chicago, the last game before the trade deadline, the Western Conference landscape changes with Steph Curry going out due to injury. Kyrie Irving is now a member of the Dallas Mavericks. I'm going to be honest with you, Damichael, I will lose no sleep. I don't know about you. I know you're a journalist and I'm just a lowly podcaster blogger. I am totally fine with Kyrie Irving going to the Mavericks. We can talk about that maybe tomorrow as well. I think the Mavericks got worse. That's my hot take. I'm killing the lead. I'll have some evidence for you. I'll have some evidence for you on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I think the Mavericks got worse bringing in Kyrie Irving. I'm a big DFS guy, in fairness, though. I like Dorian Finney-Smith, so maybe I'm a bit biased in that way. Thanks so much for listening to Locked On Grizzlies. However you take in the show, rate, review, subscribe, like, comment on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts. Damichael was a wonderful co-host. I truly enjoy working with him on a nearly daily basis. And I enjoy talking to you, dear listener, dear viewer, about these Memphis Grizzlies, however you take in the show. So thanks for making us a part of your Grizzlies prospects. We will continue our journey through this season together tomorrow. Until then, for Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies.